What is up, you guys? Shannon from Aquariums here. So today we're going to be talking about marines. I already did a video about how to set up a tropical fish aquarium, and I did another video with fish selection as well as my recommended fish for beginners and small aquariums, and a few fish I recommend for large aquariums, or fish I don't just generally recommend for beginners. That was mostly aimed at freshwater, so in this video it's going to be directed towards marines. Basically I'm going to just run through with you guys, sorry, who haven't had marines before and you just need some help setting up. I'm going to show you all the basic things you need to know for setting up. So before you do anything else, before you buy an aquarium or any of the other sort of major sort of stuff, anything overly expensive, before you do any of that stuff, first thing you want to do is decide what sort of marine aquarium you want. So there's three types of marine aquariums that most people keep. The first one is a fish-only aquarium. The second one is a invertebrate aquarium. And the last one is a reef aquarium. So understanding which of those three you want to keep is very important, because they're all extremely different and require different levels of care and experience, and just money with upkeep. They vary quite a lot in that department too. So by far the easiest is a fish only aquarium or an invertebrate aquarium. Those two are quite easy. Fish only aquarium is pretty much meaning that there is nothing in the aquarium that is susceptible to copper. So pretty much fish and rock, that's it. No corals, no invertebrates of any sort. So no starfish, no shrimps, no anemones, no crabs, you know, none of that stuff. Just fish and rocks, and that's it. The whole point behind the fish only aquarium being easy and not having invertebrates in there, it's easy because one, corals are a fair bit more sensitive than fish, so no corals, you don't have to worry about that. Same as your invertebrates. And two, and also the main one, is copper. You can use copper-based medications in a marine fish-only aquarium. Copper is the number one medication to combat white spot. So if you're running a fish-only tank, you dose copper in your tank consistently, just a half dose of copper every few weeks. It goes a long way to help prevent parasites. Where, for example, if you are running a reef tank, which consists of fish and corals and inverts, you can't use copper, so you've got to be more careful with what fish you add and what sort of medication you use. Everything has to be much more perfect as far as your water quality and stress levels of the fish go. Everything has to be much more stable, because you don't want to risk a white spot outbreak in a reef aquarium as opposed to a fish only aquarium. So that's the first one, fish only. The second one is an invertebrate aquarium. This is pretty much an aquarium that consists almost completely of corals and invertebrates, maybe a few cheap tough fish in there for a bit of movement, but it's mostly just corals and invertebrates. So, you know, obviously lots of corals and anemones and crabs and urchins and starfish and shrimps, and maybe a few tough fish just for a bit of movement, like maybe some damsels or chromis or something like that. Yeah, and that in itself isn't too difficult to keep, because like the fish only aquarium, you're only catering to the fish, and it's because they're the only things living in there, it's quite easy. With an invertebrate aquarium, you're really only catering for the corals and invertebrates, so again, quite easy. They all kind of want very similar things, same as the fish all want very similar things. The absolute hardest of the three is the reef aquarium, where you are trying to combine the needs of the coral and the needs of the fish, which are two completely different things in some areas. Try and combine those two things into one aquarium and make it all work. Then you add in the factor of disease and parasites, treating those while not upsetting your corals as well. That in turn can result in you needing more equipment on your tank, more maintenance being done, and maybe a bit more knowledge and experience on your part as well. So now that we've cleared that up, and you know the three main tanks that you can go with, we're going to look at fish tank selection for these tanks. Okay, so There's a lot of different options for a marine aquarium. One of the most popular is all-in-one style marine aquariums. This particular one is the Wingery made by Aqua One. They come in various sizes. There's also Red Sea version as well, which the concept between the two is very similar. They come with everything all included. So this is a good option for someone starting out brand new because it's just less for you to take in, basically, by the tank, by the whole setup basically, and it comes with everything you need. With the exception of a few smaller accessories you've got to buy separate, but all the important stuff's already included here. The way this tank's designed, it's all very simple to put together and run to. So with this tank, you get the light, the sump, basically comes with it. Plumbing's included, plumbing's already done. And it comes with heating in return, time and filter socket. You just got to buy some media extra to put in the sump which it comes with. Yeah. So while we're on the topic of sumps, a lot of people who maybe get fresh water first, maybe want to go to marines and you think, I'll just use my current tank for marines. Now that's fine, provided you're running a sump. Because you just want to run a canister filter on marines, it doesn't really work that way. It's not going to fare very well with that setup. While yes, some people have run a marine tank on a canister, you're going to be extremely limited on what you can keep. You're better off in a proper tank that is drilled, has an overflow weir or some sort of an overflow, maybe bulkheads or something like that, with a sump. The sump is very efficient for marines in comparison to the canister because you can just load a sump full of media, sponges. And there's room in the sump for a protein skimmer or a biopellet reactor if you want to use one of those down the track. I'm not going to go into biopellet reactors because that's not really a beginner's sort of thing. We'll cross that bridge in the next video, I suppose. But yeah, there's just more room in the sump for all the equipment you need to keep marines. That being said, if you don't like these all-in-one style tanks, you can just buy your own custom tank. You can get a standard glass tank or you can get a custom one made and get it drilled. Buy your own sump or get your own custom sump made. Get the plumbing made up by whoever you buy your tank from and buy all the bits and pieces you need separately and set it up yourself if you're confident to do that. But Aqua One and Red Sea do cater for beginners with everything included. Okay, so now we're going to talk about substrate. There's a couple of types of substrate you can go with. The most common and most popular is this stuff, coral sand. This comes in various different granule sizes. It all depends on what you personally like the look of. The finer stuff is quite a good choice. It's just much easier to clean when you're gravel vacuuming. You only want to run a fairly thin layer, or about half a centimetre to a centimetre thickness. It's just, yet again, much easier to keep clean in your aquarium. The other option, this stuff, aragonite. So not as many people use aragonite. It's very similar in consistency to coral sand. It tends to lose its white colour after a while and go a bit more yellowy. So that's why coral sand is just much more popular. Being calcium based, of course, coral sand, it will naturally buffer your pH to 8 to 8.5, which that's what all of your marine fish like, so that's the benefit of coral sand as well. So once you get the tank home, you set it all up, give this a good wash because it's quite dusty. Layer it out in your tank nice and thin. The next thing you're going to do after that is fill up the tank with water and adjust the salt level. We're going to go into that right now. Okay, so salt level can vary as well, all depending on what you want to keep. So if you were just to, say for example, if you just want to keep a fish only aquarium, then you can run the salt level a little bit lower. Where if you were going to run a reef aquarium or an invertebrate aquarium, you can run the salt level a bit higher. Your corals prefer the salt level a bit higher. They prefer it between 2.4 and 2.6. The fish, on the other hand, they prefer it a bit lower. They prefer, between 2.0 and 2.4. I mean, look, me personally, I've run my fish-only aquariums in the past, as low as 1.018 or 1.019. But you can, the kind of more, I guess, standard sort of level you'd run it at would be 1.022 to 1. The reason the fish prefer the salt level lower is because the salt makes the water denser, therefore there's less oxygen in it. So, less oxygen for the fish, so they're just generally happier in a lower salt level. If you're going to run a high salt level for a reef tank, extra wave makers may be required just to compensate the higher salt level. Higher salt level, less oxygen, so you're trying to compensate that with wave makers to put some oxygen back to the fish at least. Where in a lower salt level aquarium and fish only tank, you still want wave makers because again, salt makes water dense regardless, but it's not as big of a deal. Anyway, we don't want about that too much, but yeah. This is probably one of the most important tools you can have in setting up a saltwater aquarium. This is a refractometer. They're reasonably pricey, but I mean, they'll last you forever if you look after them, and they're 100% accurate. There are cheaper options. There's hydrometers. They're just little plastic things. I don't know what you call them, I guess, but you just dip them in the tank, fill them up with salt water, and the little needle kind of stops where the salt level is, but they're not always 100% accurate. Sometimes a little micro bubble sticks to the needle and gives you a false reading, so you have to do 2 or 3 tests and kind of guesstimate whether it's right or not. These are 100% accurate. Now the way they work from light, and hence the name refractometer. You pretty much, so you just open that, get a little bit of salt water on with a pipette, put a little bit of a drizzle there, close the lid, and you find a light. Look at one of the lights in your house or out the window or something. You look through here, you then turn this little eyepiece to make it clearer or blurrier. And it'll tell you exactly what the salt level is just from looking through there. It's hard to describe without showing you, I can't show you, but pretty much when you look through here, you've got all your salt levels listed in a row going down the screen, and half of the screen is going to be blue and the other half is going to be white. The blue area varies depending on what your salt level is. So if it's blue all the way down to say 1.023, and then at 1.023 it's the blue stops and the rest of the screen's white, where that blue is stopped, that's the salt level. You just have to calibrate these every month or so. Your little mini screwdriver in that hole there, and you calibrate it. So the way you calibrate it, you get some distilled water from an RO unit. Put a little smear of it there. Again, look it through the light, and if you look through the light with RO water on there, it should read 0. Because being RO water, it's not going to have any salt in it at all. If you look at it with RO water and you can see that if it's telling you there's salt in there, it needs calibrating. So you then, with the RO water still in there, you just turn the screwdriver till it goes back to 0, and then it's calibrated. Other than that, just give that a rinse off in RO water every time you use it. And that's the only general maintenance on this. No electricity, no batteries, nothing electronic in this at all. It's strictly from light, and that's it. So yes, if you're running a fish only, you can go as low as 1.022 to 1.021. Reef and invertebrate, 2.3 to 4.5. Quite happy. Okay, so the next thing we're going to go into now is live rock. Now, before I go into this, you guys will need to know about how to set the sump up and how that works with like your media and your bacteria that grows in your sump and all that sort of stuff. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that because I'm actually kind of limited on time. Sorry about that, guys. But if you go back a couple of videos of mine and through my channel, one of my videos that is dedicated to filtration, that will explain virtually everything you need to know about a sump and how it works and how media in the sump grows bacteria on it and it works to keep the water clean and filter it basically. So if you want to just go watch that video after this one to find out all the info about a sump. I will say the only thing that is different between a freshwater and saltwater sump is the protein skimmer. In a marine sump, you're just going to have a protein skimmer in there, which I will show you in this video. But as far as all the other stuff goes about bacteria, just go back to my filtration video to watch that one, because I'm kind of running out of time. So anyway, apologise for that, by the way. But anyways, we're going to live rock now. So with live rock, the whole point of live rock is to create hiding places for fish, to create elevation for your corals so they can get closer to the light than your coral tank. So when placing your live rock, you obviously want it to be aesthetically pleasing to you, but also practical for the things you're going to keep in your tank. One of the mistakes people make is they get rocks like rocks like this. Big boulders with not very little shape to them, they're just these big flat round sort of things. Nothing wrong with having them in your tank, it's just a matter of where you put them. Like putting a big boulder flat like that on the bottom of your tank, a lot of detritus and waste is going to build up around the edge and underneath this rock. And what can happen from that is over time, all that waste living under your rock starts to decompose and turn into nitrogen gas, which that's quite toxic stuff. When it gets into a big enough, high enough level, something disturbs that area and all the nitrogen gas bubbles coming out at once. It can be quite toxic, especially to the fish. So try not to put big flat surfaces flat on the bottom of your tank. Get rocks like this with points. You have points on the bottom, so it's minimal contact with the bottom of the tank. You have areas where water can flow underneath and keep it fairly clean. Then, once you've gotten past that, you can just make some sort of structure by leaning rocks. I'm kind of just mucking around now, I don't really have room to work, but yeah. Just kind of stacking rocks up really, just trying to make some sort of a scape you can elevate your corals on. You want to get rocks that you can wedge corals in, because a lot of your corals, like the soft corals, not so much, but your hard corals, when you buy them, they've got a hard calcium-based body. It's not going to stick to the rock the second you put it in the tank. You've got to find rocks that have lots of holes and crevices in them that you can kind of wedge them into. Otherwise, if that's not an option, you can use glue. There is reef glue you can use to attach corals to your rocks, so I guess don't worry too much about that if you're happy gluing. Problem is, once you've glued it, it's stuck there. So you have to make sure that is exactly where you want it. Also, pay little attention to the colour of the rock when you buy it. This will change when they're in your tank, because you go to the shop, you go to the shop, you see all these nice pink and purple rocks covered in coralline and covered in different types of algae and little corals and stuff growing on them. They look great for the colour, so you buy them. But that's not the way to do it. You want to buy a rock for the shape, not for the colour. The colour will change depending on your tank. Like, yeah, ideally you want the pink and purple coralline growth. You want it to look like that. That is achieved through high calcium, high KH and magnesium, low phosphate, low nitrate. So if your tank has high phosphate, high nitrate, low calcium, low KH, doesn't matter how colourful the rock is when you buy it, it's just going to go brown and get algae, brown algae growing all over it because of the phosphate nitrate levels are going to be so high. You can buy a rock from a shop that's wonderful shape, but it's all brown and disgusting, there's nothing growing on it. Take it home, put it in your tank. If you manage your tank well and you've got high calcium KH and low phosphate nitrate, that rock will eventually turn pink and purple with coralline growth. So yeah, pay a little attention to the colour and only go by the shape when you buy live rock. Live rock is also what we would say is advantageous to your filtration. What that means is live rock is basically a big part of your filtration, because the bacteria living all over this rock, which feeds on fish waste and breaks it down just like the bacteria in the filter does. You've got little microorganisms and little invertebrates and little worms and crustaceans and all sorts of things like that living in the live rock. For example, There's various different species of worms, brittle stars, little crabs, shrimps and stuff like that. All these little creatures are scavengers. They'll come out at night, scavenge all the waste out of your tank, all the leftover bits of food. And then you've got your bacteria breaking down waste on a microscopic level. So live rock all around is great for filtration. One thing that happens with all marine tanks when you first set them up that is extremely different from a freshwater tank is cycling your tank. You set up a freshwater tank, for example, you run it for a week and you can start adding fish in. Marine is completely different. Marine tanks take between 3 to 4 weeks to cycle from the day you put your rock in. The reason that happens is because, like I was saying before, you've got to imagine you've set up a marine tank, the water brand new, filtration and media all brand new, so there's not really any bacteria. Even after a week, there's pretty much no bacteria, not much at all. You then go and chuck in all of your live rock. So let's say you've got a 200 litre tank, you get filter running for about a week, minimal bacteria in that week time. You then go and throw in maybe 8 to 10 pieces of rock this sort of size to fill up most of your tank. You want to get all your rock at once if you can. When you do that and you put that rock in, adding in all that rock isn't like when you add rock in a freshwater tank. You add rock in a freshwater tank when it's brand new, it's just rock, that's it. You add live rock into a brand new marine tank, as I was saying before, there's all little creatures living on this rock, little crustaceans and worms and bacteria. All those things are living creatures that produce waste, like fish do. So really, adding in a ton of live rock when you first set the tank up is the equivalent of adding in a whole bunch of fish, which is something you would never normally do in a brand new tank. When you do this and add all this rock, naturally within a week or so of having that rock in there, you're going to get a massive ammonia spike. It's going to go off the chart. Sounds bad, but you want that to happen. Because for starters, there's nothing important living in the tank yet. You don't have any fish yet. So ammonia spike's not going to hurt anything, just let it happen. You have to let it happen. Because initially, yeah, you think, oh, ammonia, it's bad. But what happens from this ammonia spike is the ammonia is what the bacteria feeds on. So when the ammonia goes through the roof, it kind of encourages your bacteria to feed on that ammonia. As the bacteria feeds on this huge ammonia spike you've got up here and starts to break it down, at the same time it's getting broken down, the bacteria is feeding on it, it's growing into a larger population of bacteria, which is what you want for your fish. So by week 1 you've got ammonia, bacteria's breaking it down back to 0. Then week 2, nitrite spikes through the roof because bacteria breaks ammonia down into nitrite, second level waste. Again, bacteria breaks it down to 0. By week 3 or week 4, third level waste, nitrate spikes through the roof. Goes back down again. Ammonia, nitrate will spike one after the other, and it's in stages of 3 to 4 weeks usually, provided your filtration's adequate. And you're testing your water along the way to make sure those 3 spikes have happened and they're gone. Once stage 3, your nitrate stage, is down to 0 and it's all finished, that is the indication that your tank is fully cycled and ready for fish. At that point, you can add fish or corals or invertebrates. So you then go by adding maybe 1 or 2 fish, and then waiting about a week, and then adding another 1 or 2 fish, same as your corals. Don't dump them all in at once, because it's exactly like dumping a whole bunch of fish in at once. It's just like when you're dumping a live rock all at once. You're possibly going to get another spike. Except this time, you have fish and they could die. So it's fine to do it for the rock because that encourages your bacteria to grow, but you don't want to do that for fish, so add your fish slowly. That's the main area with marines. That is extremely different to freshwater tanks when you first set them up. Is the spiking of ammonia, nitrate when the rock is added. You can avoid this if you use rock that has nothing alive on it. So for example, cured live rock, or Texas holy rock, or limestone rock. If you were to use those in a marine tank, there's nothing alive on those rocks, therefore it's much more similar to setting up a freshwater tank. You're just going to put the rock in, let it run a week or two, let some bacteria grow, maybe add some liquid bacteria booster to help along, and then you can just add fish gradually every week. And that is it. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the next step. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly show you guys the protein skimmer. So the protein skimmer pretty much just sits in the sump like so. It can vary depending on what type of protein skimmer you have, but most of the decent ones, you just sit them in the sump like that. Make sure the pump in the protein skimmer is fully submerged. You clean out your skimmer cup, usually once a week, but again that can vary depending on how well your skimmer is skimming your water and how much waste is in your tank. So hence the name protein skimmer. It is skimming all the proteins, all the bad proteins out of your water, all the fatty acids from the fish waste and the coral waste. So it just helps you achieve pristine, clean water, which is beneficial to corals mostly. Running a fish-only marine tank, unless you're going to run an extremely high fish load, protein skimmer is not overly necessary. You can just run a fish-only tank on a really good filtration system. But if you want to do a reef tank or a coral invertebrate tank, yeah, protein skimmer is highly recommended. So the next thing you'll definitely need for your marine tank, regardless of whether it's a fish-only tank or a reef tank, is wave makers. Now, depending on how big your aquarium is, will depend on how many wave makers you'll need. As I was saying before, how the salt makes the water denser, so you need to compensate by extra flow. That's what we have wave makers for. They come in many different shapes and sizes. Some of them are just kind of very standard. They're just plug in and turn on sort of ones that don't really do anything fancy. They're just a consistent flow. Other ones like this one are programmable, and as you can see, it's actually pulsating, so it's not a consistent flow. It's actually, pulsating and making waves. You also have the option to control that. How fast it pulsates, how many liters per hour it does, how fast the flow is, all that sort of stuff. So the fish appreciate the extra flow, just for that extra oxygen, and so do the corals. The corals appreciate the extra flow for a different reason. When corals excrete their waste, it comes out kind of like a clear slime, and they need a good water flow to sweep that away. Otherwise, what can happen if there's not enough flow and they excrete their waste, sometimes the waste can end up sticking back onto the coral and they can get infections. So yeah, good water flow is required for corals. Basically, you don't want too much either. You just want to have your coral's tentacles kind of swaying back and forth gently. That's kind of what you go for with having a wave maker. Okay, so let's say you want to put some corals in your tank now. Other than the wave maker and the slightly higher salt level and the protein skimmer in your sump, the other very important requirement that corals need is lighting. With a fish-only tank, it doesn't matter what lights you have. You can have no light for all the fish care. Corals lighting is a whole other factor. Corals need a spectrum of 125K. Most of your LED lights that are designed for corals can provide that. Otherwise, you can use T8 or T5 tubes, but you'd need at least 2 to 3 tubes to achieve this spectrum, depending on what brand of tubes you're using. A lot of your programmable LEDs though, yeah, it's all too easy to keep corals with these. This same spectrum applies for anemones as well. It applies to both your hard and your soft corals and clams. On that note with clams are a great addition to a tank because not only do they look great, they also filter out phosphate. So they can help improve your water quality. Inside of corals there's actually an algae that grows, same as anemones. That's why the light's so important to them, because inside corals and anemones there's a type of algae that grows within them. It's called zooxanthellae. This algae, as it grows from the light, the corals feed on that algae, and that's how they feed. That's how they basically feed through photosynthesis, by feeding on the coral that's growing within them. Other than that, yeah, good water flow, good water quality, protein skimmer, high salt level, 1.024 to 2.5, and a good quality coral food that you'll feed your corals usually about 2 to 3 times a week. Combined with just a few coral supplements. I'm not going to go into too much detail of the supplements, but basically corals, again, they require high calcium KH and low phosphate nitrate. This is achieved by regular water changes as well as dosing a few of the coral supplements in your aquarium. The calcium KH is especially needed for hard corals. I mean, they both need it. Hard and soft corals both need it, but the hard corals just need it a little more so than the soft corals do because they have a hard calcium-based body. So therefore, you know, they need calcium KH. Coral placement is also very important. You got to understand that there are different species of corals that live in different depths of the ocean, and it's important to be aware of that when you're purchasing them. Some corals can do better on the bottom, like for example these zoo anthelids, for example. They're quite easy to keep. You can keep them pretty much anywhere in the tank. They're not overly demanding. They spread like crazy when they're doing well. Whereas for example corals like fungias, they look very similar to anemones. They are basically, they're hard coral. They got a flat disc body. So they generally live on the bottom, on the sand of your aquarium. Then you got corals like your Duncanopsomnius, seem to do better middle to top of the aquarium, same as like your Catphilias and your zoos and your torches and frog spawns. The other thing you have to account for is corals can sting, and each species of coral has its own type of stinging cell. Corals can sting each other. You don't want to place them too closely together. If they're the same species or at least the same genus of coral, then yes, you can place them close together. If they're the same species, you can actually cluster them together like they would naturally be in the wild. That's fine. But generally you want to spread them out a little bit if you can, if they're different. Have at least a couple of inches gap between your corals if they're completely different genus. And the number one rule, especially if you want anemones with your corals, get the anemone first. Anemones, unlike corals, have the ability to move. So when you put an anemone in your tank brand new, he's going to move around. He's going to find a home, somewhere where he wants to sit and live. So it might take him a couple of days, it might take him a couple of weeks. He'll just be in a different spot every morning until eventually he decides to stay somewhere. If you've got a tank full of corals and you put an anemone in, as he's walking around looking for a place to live, he's going to bump into your corals and they're going to sting each other. So you want the anemones to establish first. Also, other than selecting the corals, just as much care needs to be taken into selecting fish. The fish behind me, a lot of them are predators, they're quite aggressive, so you've got to be aware of things like that. Also, a lot of fish don't really go with corals very well either, so another thing you've got to account for. If you're going to do a reef tank, you're a bit more limited on the species you can keep. You can't have, for example, triggers or parrotfish or puffers. Anything with a beak, they will eat corals. Also triggers, when they get, especially bigger triggers, they'll eat small fish. Like, you can't get little Ocellaris clownfish in with like a big queen trigger or a clown trigger or something, or a lionfish. So fish selection is another very important thing, but I'm sure the aquarium you decide to go and buy your fish from, they can help you select the fish for your tank. So water changes are another very important thing. Just like in a freshwater tank, a saltwater tank needs water changes as well. So the concept between the two is very much the same. Small tank, so anything up to say 150 to 200 litres, you'd want a water change once a week, about 30 to 40% of the tank. Anything bigger, you can let it go to every 2 weeks, or you can do it once a week if you want to. I'd advise doing it once a week anyway if you're really getting big on your corals, because corals do like that really pristine water. Fish, you can let the water change go a bit. They can tolerate a little bit of nitrate for a little bit, but corals like that water to be perfect all the time. So if you're going to go a fish only tank, then yeah, don't have to be as finicky about it. But yeah, reef and invertebrate tank, definitely water change on a weekly basis, I personally think. Same as a freshwater tank, use a gravel vacuum to clean your substrate. While you're water changing, change your pre-filter sponges, so your filter wool. Clean your skimmer cups if they need to be done as well. Clean your wave makers if they've got all stuff stuck to them. And yeah, there's a couple of options in regards to making up your salt water. You can either buy salt and mix it up yourself at home, which it's actually quite a good option to do. A lot of the salts that are sold, I know a lot of the salts that we sell, They come with the calcium, KH, magnesium already in the salt, so you mix up the salt and it's already got all those fundamentals that corals need in them. Or, like another thing we also do, we do sell ocean water. You can just get refills, just bring in your drum and get a refill of ocean water, whichever one suits you better. I found the ocean water, depending where it's from, this being YouTube, it is worldwide, but the ocean water we get, the salt level is a bit high. It's usually around 2.6 to 2.7, so we have to water it down a little bit with some RO water to the desired level, where if you're just doing the buckets of salt, then you can just mix it to the exact level you want every time. Okay, so one of the other very important items that you will need is this. Well, depending on which setup you go with, you can either go for, if you're just doing a fish only tank, the saltwater master test kit. This comes with ammonia, nitrate and pH in it. Very important, especially when you're in that period of cycling your tank. You're going to need to be testing for all those things. If you're going to then do a reef or coral invertebrate tank, the reef master kit. This comes with calcium, KH, nitrate and phosphate. All the very important things that you'll be needing to test for on a regular basis when keeping corals. That's very important. So actually, I lie. The refractometer, it's a very important thing you need, yes, but I said it was the most. Okay, I'd say the refractometer and the test kits are the two most important things you're going to need when setting up and running a saltwater aquarium. On that note, there isn't much other equipment you need other than the stuff test kits, refractometer, cleaning equipment, which is very much the same as your freshwater tanks, your gravel vacuum and algae magnet, the glass, filter wall for your sump, and that's really it. There might be a couple other little bits and pieces I'm forgetting right now, but they're the bare essentials. Okay, so feeding is another thing that you need to have a little bit of knowledge about. There is a 30-second rule with feeding marine fish. What that means is when you feed the food, you want it all to be gone within 30 seconds. A minute at the absolute most. But generally we use this as a guide so people don't overfeed by accident. You just want that guideline so every speck of food is eaten within a certain time frame. That way you know you haven't overfed your tank. There are various things you can feed marine fish. These guys right now are just eating granules, but ideally you want to have 80% of your diet for your marine fish to be frozen foods. They get much more nutritional value from the frozen foods, and it's just more natural for them as well. There are a wide variety of frozen foods to cater for all species. If you are keeping mostly carnivorous fish like damsels and clownfish and gobies and stuff like that, and angels, and you want to stick to a protein-based diet, so brine shrimp, mysis shrimp, carnivorous marine mix. When you get into things like tangs and foxface and blennies and rabbitfish, they're more vegetarian, so you want to add some veggies into their diet. So there's various vegetarian frozen food mixes for them as well. They'll quite happily eat the brine shrimp too, but you want to give them some vegetation. Very important also for tangs, they need seaweed. So you get the dehydrated seaweed from most aquariums, you feed that to your tangs every single day. That keeps them nice and fat and healthy. The reason you need seaweed to keep tangs fat and healthy is because unlike your carnivorous fish, tangs, their stomach's flat and straight, where your carnivorous fish, their stomach's kind of zigzag shaped. It holds food better, where the flat straight stomach of a tang, food just passes straight through and straight out when you feed them the frozen food. So they don't hold it in their body very long, therefore they're not able to extract much of the nutrients from their food. So if you feed them some seaweed before their main meal, give them a couple of strips of seaweed, let them eat that, wait 10-15 minutes, then feed them their frozen food. The seaweed lines their stomach, therefore when they eat the frozen food it helps keep it in their stomach a bit longer so they can actually digest some of it properly and get some nutrients out of it, and that's how you end up with fat healthy tangs. In the wild, tangs eat nothing but seaweed. They go in big schools just grazing seaweed beds constantly, and that's basically how you keep them fat. You can feed your fish once a day, you can feed them 3 times a day. Does not matter. It won't over pollute your tank, provided all the food is eaten. Doesn't matter how many times you feed, as long as it all gets eaten. It's leftover food that it's leftover food that pollutes your tank, not regular feedings. Another very important thing in most reef aquariums is a cleanup crew. Now this can consist of many different fish and invertebrates depending on your setup. If you're going to go a reef tank or an invertebrate tank, there's a lot of different cleanup crew animals you can use. There's various different types of snails. Some work the glass and the rocks, others work on turning the sand over. There's also various scavengers, like different types of scavenger shrimps and hermit crabs. Then there's fish. There's gobies that turn the sand over. There's blennies that eat algae. Tangs and foxface and rabbitfish all eat algae as well. And then there's cleanup crew that work on a different level. There's your parasite feeders. So cleaner wrasse, for example, like this fella right here. They feed on parasites off the fish. So having a cleaner wrasse in your tank goes a long way. It'll keep the fish parasite free. There's also red-lined cleaner shrimp. They're another type of parasite feeder. The fish will actually swim up to the shrimp and kind of lie down, and the shrimp will clean them. So if you're going to go a reef tank, you can pretty much keep any of those cleanup crew creatures I just listed. Fish only tank, you can have the cleaner wrasse or the blenny or any of the algae eating fish that I said. But being a fish only tank, if you're going to use copper especially, then none of the invertebrates. One thing I'll also quickly mention, guys, because I completely forgot about it, kind of spaced. The temperature in a marine aquarium, regardless of whether it's fish only or not, it's exactly the same as a tropical fish aquarium. So you want to aim for a temperature ranging from 24 to 26 degrees. I completely spaced on the temperature. Sorry about that, so I'll just throw that in there now. So now we're going to talk on the subject of white spot. White spot is one of the most common problems that literally everyone gets with marines at least once. White spot is a parasite. It is dormant in your water. Every marine tank has white spot in the water, it's just dormant. The best way to, well, not have any major issues with white spot is to keep everything healthy and happy. Because white spot only can really hurt your fish if they're stressed. So if you have good water quality, none of your fish are fighting with each other, you've got plenty of places for them to hide, they're all fat and healthy and eating well, by rights they shouldn't be stressed, so they shouldn't get white spot. Because white spot, the way it works, when a fish is stressed, its immune system goes down. When that happens, like when our immune system gets a bit weak, we are more open to cold and flu and other things. When a fish's immune system goes down, they're open to parasites, so the white spot can actually sense the fish's immune system lowering and it can hatch out of its dormant state. Goes and finds the fish and then repopulates on the fish's body. The fish looks like it's been dipped in sand. This is covered in all these little specks which can then spread to other fish. Again, there are medications for it. Copper for fish only tanks. In a reef tank there are reef safe medications that don't have copper in them. Vertnex is one that comes to mind. It's malachite green and quinine. Medic, which is hydrogen peroxide in a powdered form, they both work fine for reef tanks. So that's basically how to deal with white spot. Just keep your fish stress free, be aware of what meds are available to you before you decide what setup you want to go with. If you find that a reef tank is going to be too hard for you when it comes to white spot, go for a fish only tank. Or if you want fish like a blue tang, for example, or a powder blue tang or a powder brown tang, or various delicate species of butterfly fish or Moorish idols, maybe consider going a fish only tank, because the last thing you want is a fish that's prone to white spot in a reef tank where you've already spent, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars on corals and equipment. The last thing you need is a blue tang that gets white spot every month and you're having to dump medication in the tank, which in turn, while it may not kill your corals, it can upset them, and long term may kill some of your more delicate corals. So you might want to just consider that as well. Or you take a plunge and get yourself one of these guys. This is a UV sterilizer. You won't need one quite this big because this UV sterilizer is running this whole system here. UV sterilizer, you pretty much hook it up to your return pump. Your water comes out of your return pump from your sump, goes through the UV sterilizer before it goes back into your tank, or you can just leave your return pump going into your tank as is and run a separate pump for your UV, again going back up to your tank, or just going back to the other end of your sump, whichever works for you, it doesn't really matter. Basically it's just a cylinder with a UV bulb in it, and the water flows past the bulb before it goes back into the system. The UV bulb is incredibly bright, and it's actually so bright that any parasites or algae spores or bacteria spores that pass through the light just get completely killed, get burnt basically. So provided you get a decent quality UV sterilizer, it takes white spot out of the equation. Because as I was saying how it works off stress, let's say you put a fish in and it's very stressed. Your current fish are bullying this new fish. It can't find anywhere to hide to settle down. It'll get white spot within a day or two. If you have a sterilizer running and it's a decent one that does the job properly, even if that fish is stressed and its immune system's low, the dormant white spot that would normally be in the water waiting for a fish to stress out, it wouldn't be there. The sterilizer would have killed it all. So the fish can just kind of, it can stress all at once, it's not going to get spots. And then it can just de-stress in its own time, rather than you yourself have that worry and stress of putting in a new fish and your current fish hassling it. And the first thing that any marine hobbyist, first thing that goes through their head when something like that's happening, when a new fish is getting bullied, is quick, settle in, stop stressing, because if you stress for another day, you're going to get spots, sort of thing. You can just let it settle in at its own pace with a UV sterilizer, provided it's a decent one. The difference between a decent one and a not so decent one, it's nothing to do with the bulb, they're all very much the same. It's to do with the way the insides of the actual sterilizer are designed. The good ones, the way they work, water goes in, it has to spiral around the bulb many times before it can exit. This means the water is exposed to the bulb maximum amount of time. The cheap copycat ones that may be only really designed to do ponds and to just kill algae and that's it, there's no spiral, it just goes in straight up and out. So it's not in the sterilizer for very long, not exposed to the bulb for very long. So that's the other option to combat white spot if you don't want to go too heavy on the meds all the time, or if you just want to have peace of mind, or if you want to have something a little more sensitive in a reef tank. And of course, last but not least, anyone who wants a reef aquarium or an invertebrate aquarium, please take the plunge like the sterilizer. This is for peace of mind and it'll save you a lot of drama and headache and loss in the future. Get yourself a chiller. I cannot stress that enough. Fish, they can handle temperature fluctuation a little bit. I've had my marine tanks go up to 28, 29 degrees with just fish only, and the fish have been fine for a few days like that before I've managed to bring the temperature back down again. But corals, they cannot handle that at all. If the temperature fluctuates even 1 or 2 degrees up and down a few times, some of your more delicate corals can start to bleach and die. So you want to just get yourself a chiller. Depending on whereabouts in the world you live, this does vary a lot. Here in Australia, it does get quite hot in our summers. So yeah, you do need a chiller for your marine tank. I mean, geez, I'm running a chiller on my freshwater tank just because I have some of my freshwater fish cost me quite a lot, and it was a marine tank that's now been converted to fresh, and I've just left the chiller on there for that reason as well. But anyway, for corals especially, yeah, you want to have a chiller and have it set to 25 degrees, 25 to 26 degrees, either one's fine. The way the chiller works, similar to the sterilizer, you just tap it into your return, or like what most people do, they just run it off a separate pump, because both the chiller and the UV sterilizer, they come with their own recommended flow rate, and your current return pump is more than likely not going to be exactly the flow rate that they need. So it works better to just get them their own separate pump that's custom to them. You just run it straight through the chiller, back into your sump, or up into your tank, whichever suits you best. Well, that's it guys, thank you very much for watching. I hope my video was helpful to anyone who would like to go marines for the first time. Sorry, there probably are some areas I couldn't cover, or there are some areas that I probably could have gone into a little bit more detail with. time, so sorry about that, but I covered all the main areas for you guys. Any questions, anything you don't know, anything that I didn't cover that you want to know about, don't hesitate to comment below and let me know. I'll try to answer your questions the best I can in the comments. I'll also try to upload more regular. Things are just been crazy lately. But yeah, so I hope you enjoyed my video. Can you do us a big favour, guys? If you like and subscribe my channel, and yeah, hook me up for those comments, guys. Any questions you guys have, let me know. Cheers, guys. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.